Welcome to chapter 20, which is poisons, toxins, hazards, and risks. We'll start this chapter by doing a highly hazardous demo. Okay, for today's demo, we're going to do something dangerous on the topic of poisons, toxins, hazards, and risks. So I'm going to purposely allow myself to ingest radiation. Banana. I've just dosed myself with radioactive potassium. If I finish that banana, I will have dosed myself with approximately 0.1 microsievert of radiation. Well, all bananas are radioactive because there's always going to be some percentage of radioactive potassium. You would have to eat 100 bananas in a day just to equal the dosage you would experience from just every day walking around in the sunshine and living your life. However, essentially, I've got myself one dose, 1.01 doses, 1.01 doses, because I'd get one natural dose from life, and I've taken myself a little bit farther. Now to further risk my life. A common everyday Brazil nut, one of the most radioactive foods there is. Tasty. It's 1,000 times greater in radioactivity than most other foods. It has natural radium that it takes up from the soil. The average Brazil nut eater takes maybe 52 ounces of Brazil nuts a year, which is equivalent of 0.27 millisieverts. So a milli is 1,000 times greater than a micro. But one nut right there probably dosed myself with 0.7 microsieverts of radiation. So that's about 7 times more radioactive than that banana. But before you're like, oh no, will professor be able to finish off the class? It takes about 100 millisieverts. 100 millisieverts. Notice, if I ate 52 ounces a year, I would still be less than a fourth of a millisievert in radioactive doses. So it takes 100 millisieverts a year to increase the rate of cancer. Now, if I were to eat 50 Brazil nuts in a day, that would be bad. It wouldn't be radiation poisoning. It would actually be toxicity. There's also a large amount of selenium and other various metals in there. So I would suffer poisoning from selenium. However, a little bit is okay. As we'll learn in this chapter, the danger is in the dosage. Now, with that in mind, should I avoid Brazil nuts? Should I avoid bananas? Think about it. No. Sugar decays teeth. Fats will harden arteries. Salt will increase blood pressure. Vitamins in excess can still be toxic. What about all the additives? We think them safe. But we thought DDT was safe. We thought CFCs were safe. We thought methyl tetrabutyl ethyl ether was safe. We thought leaded gasoline was safe. Obviously, we've been wrong. So are these things safe? Our focus for this chapter is, are there poisons in our food? Is our food supply safe? The first thing we have to do is define what is poison and what is safe. Well, poison is considered a substance that can cause illness or death when it enters our bodies, usually a component of our food or drink with air we breathe. Now, a toxin is a specific type of poison that's a harmful substance that has a biological origin. So when we say, when that meme of, is it venomous or is it poisonous? Technically, both cases, it's toxic. It can be considered a toxin. But poisonous and toxin would be, in that case, it would be a poisonous toxin and a toxic venom. But toxin is usually thought of as having biological origin. Coming from poison comes from the Middle English poison or poison, which potion or poisonous drink, with being potio, drink or draft of potion. So even from the origin, the idea was out there for a poisonous food or beverage. It didn't have to be a poisonous drink, but all the times you hear about kings being poisoned through their wine and various things. Think of that. When we think of toxin, that comes from toxicum, Greek for poison smear on arrows as a method of war. So we think of toxin, we're smearing some substance like as we'll talk about later, like plants or poison dart frog onto them, so that when the arrows hit you, you become paralyzed or die. However, right now the terms are practically interchangeable. Like we think of toxic waste. Toxic waste is not a toxin. It would be a poison, if anything. We think about poisonous mushrooms. Technically, a poisonous mushroom is a toxin. And as I said, we still call various snakes poisonous, even though they're really venomous, and that would technically still be a toxin, the venom they produce. But the idea here is danger is all around us, but there are various gradations of the danger. HCN, which is hydrocyanic acid, and sodium cyanide are powerfully lethal. Now, alcohol, which is a pleasant poison, is only mildly lethal. You drink too much of it, yes, you do die. But does it kill you right away? No. You can drink a lot of it for over many years and still not die. Even aspirin is dangerous in large enough amounts. I mean, there's a story in the book that I actually looked a little bit outside about kids mistaking low-dose flavored aspirins for candy. In 1950s, kids began overdosing and dying. Essentially, they put out low-dose flavored aspirin, and it went on. It was sold like hotcakes. It was tasty aspirin. People wanted to take it. The kids would open them and they'd take it as like candy. They eat it and they overdose and they die. This was such a problem that there were multiple different laws and various different safety features were added. And the way the book puts it, that the corporations didn't give a crap until like the governments had to step in. No, the corporations did care. They was kind of bad. They wanted to regulate themselves before the government had to regulate themselves. They tried to add like the child safety cap to limit the fatalities, to stem this tide. So they wanted to make the caps harder to open so kids couldn't get into them. They didn't really want to limit the number of pills in the bottle, because then the consumers would think they're getting less. So, but they did eventually limit the number of pills in the bottle. So you would have to open obviously multiple bottles in order to hopefully overdose. But this led up to the Poison Prevention Packaging Act. So they passed that to try to essentially to warn about the dangers of aspirin, and that like taking too much will kill you, and putting the safety caps and mandating that. Also, so we can keep kids from accidentally killing themselves. Table salt is a weak poison. It's eating far too much, which more than many of us would find palatable, will result in a disruption of our sodium ion channels in the body. It will result in illness and death. It takes approximately 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So the average 70-kilogram man would take 210 grams of sodium chloride to kill him. but it still happens. Hannah Overton in 2006 was convicted of poisoning her 6-year-old son. That case has since been overturned, and I think she's getting over $600,000 for the wrongful incarceration. That is possible. Certain kids to naturally have a tendency to oversalt their foods and keep salting it, and I think she was trying to prevent the kid from eating too much food, and so that gave him some salted liquid as well, and that led to the eventual overdose of salt death. But it was not an intentional death. Even too much water can be toxic. And we're not talking about drowning. We're talking about literally you drink the water, it goes into your stomach, gets absorbed into your body in the proper way, not that it blocks your lungs, you get no oxygen. It's like you drink enough water, it will kill you. Once again, fatal imbalance in your electrolytes. Instead of too much sodium, you end up having like too little sodium. That you get what's called water intoxication. This often occurs in marathon runners where they're drinking a lot of water to stay hydrated. I think in 1977, a Florida woman thought it was healthy to drink 4 gallons a day. It's like, if drinking water is healthy for you, then drinking more water is more healthy for you. And so she drank 4 gallons a day to like try to help pee out all of her toxins. I think there was another story I read in brief about hold your pee for a Wii back when Nintendo Wii was out, and there was a radio program of trying to hold your urine in for as long as possible to win a Nintendo Wii. When like a little girl drank too much fluid and held it too long, and eventually had died from that. So yeah, water can be lethal. It's crazy, but yeah. The key word here is excessive. The poison is in the dosage. The danger is in the dosage. Like, beware of death by chocolate. Too much chocolate can be dangerous. Speaking of the dangers in the dosage, let's look at how to calculate blood alcohol content real quick. Blood alcohol content is literally the weight of alcohol in grams over the weight of the person in grams times a sex factor, so male versus female factor, times 100 to turn it into a percent. So the average drink, whether it's a beer, a shot of whiskey, or a glass of wine, is assumed to be about 14 grams. Now, if you use a small shot or, say, a big glass, you may be getting more. If you're dealing with a more concentrated thing like a craft beer, sometimes those have higher alcohol contents. You'll have to increase. But for a 5-ounce alcohol by volume beer, 12-ounce, not a 12% wine, or even a 40-ounce whiskey, they all go down to 14 grams. So with that in mind, how much would a 270-pound man need to drink to get blackout drunk, which is highly not good. Not good. So if I have the blood alcohol content of about 0.20, now 0.2 to 0.3 is where you get into blackout. When you get to 0.3, you start to get to coma. 0.4, your high likelihood of death. So 0.2 equals 100 times the weight of the alcohol. So how many drinks? Alcohol per drink over the weight of the person. So
at 270 pounds. I already calculated this. This is 122.5 kilograms. So 122, we'll say 500 grams. And the male factor is 0.68. So how much alcohol would I need to drink to get blackout drunk, which is not a goal? 0.2 divided by 100 times 122, 500 times 0.68. So I basically got that over there and got those two things over there. So the weight of alcohol, it would have to be, weight would be 166.6 grams. Now, how many drinks? It's important because I'm not drinking the alcohol in grams, I'm drinking it in weight. And how many drinks? 166.6 grams. So if there is 14 grams per one drink, how many drinks? Whether it's shots or beers in quick succession, that would be something like approximately 11.9. So approximately 12 drinks. We'll say 12 drinks, and I would be blackout drunk, or at least a high likelihood of going blackout. Now let's think about it, the dangers in the dosage. Because that same 0.2, what happens if instead you're using a 150-pound woman? So the weight of the alcohol, 150 pounds, is 68 kilos, so 68,000. And the woman factor is 0.55. So doing the same math, 0.2 divided by 100 times 68000 times 0.55. 0.55. And you get 74.8. 74.8 grams. 74.8. And remember, there's 14 grams per one drink. 14, that's close to only 5.3 drinks. So a little over 6 drinks, almost half the volume, a little bit under half the volume. And that person would be blackout drunk. Not good. So remember, there is some advantages of being a little bit big. It takes a lot higher dosages of things to kill you. But it also then takes a lot more to get you drunk if that is your desired goal. Famous wrestler from the 80s and 90s, Andre the Giant, he was literally a giant of a man, and he would be drinking beers by the case and still barely buzzed because he was huge. If you've ever seen Princess Bride, you've seen him. Interesting fellow. So dangers in the dosage. 5.3 drinks, 0.2 for light person. Much heavier, 166. You take 12 drinks. What might get me slightly buzzed at 3 drinks, 4 drinks, get higher, and then suddenly, boom, you're gone. So, a little bit of something is safe, maybe a lot of it not so safe.
The question isn't, is it poisonous? The question should be, how much will it take to be dangerous? Which brings us to the term lethal dose. The problem is the difference between animals and people. The lethal dose is the quantity of substance that causes death. Dogs can easily be killed by chocolate. Most humans cannot. Certain animals, I think strawberries are toxic for dogs as well. There are certain foods that animals can eat that we cannot. We cannot digest them. Like some berries that are on plants can be easily eaten by birds, but if we eat them, we're going to get upset stomach and maybe death. And even then, there's a difference between various people. You could have a very sturdy person with a like iron stomach, and you can have very fragile people. So that what's a lethal dose for one guy may be like just enough to make him give him an upset stomach for another one. So we usually want to test a large dose and measure what's called the LD50. The LD50 is the lethal dosage, the amount that would kill exactly half of a large population of animals, saying that the average animal would die. Over like 50% would be fragile enough that it kills. The other 50% survive because they're sturdy enough. Say, what's the average dosage that would kill a person? So now this is usually given as a weight of dosage per weight of animal or substance, usually like grams per kilogram, milligrams per kilogram, something like that. They often tell us how the dosage was given, whether it was like oral. So like, did you eat it? Inhalation, did you breathe it? Intravenous, was it injected into? Was it subcutaneous? Was it injected below the skin? Was it injected into your stomach, interperitoneal? So how was this administered? All that could matter. Aspirin, for example, has a LD50 of about 1.5 grams per kilogram. Sodium cyanide, on the other hand, is something like 15 milligrams per kilogram. So that's something like what, like 100 times more fatal. 100 times more fatal. Even so, this data must be interpreted with caution. The animal species can differ, as does the method of dosage. As I said, injected below the skin is usually less effective than injected into the abdomen, which could be even less effective than intravenous. Nicotine, for example, the lethal dosage for oral is 230 milligrams. If you have injected into the stomach, into the abdomen, it's 9.5 milligrams. But you inject it into the bloodstream, it's like 0.3 milligrams. We're looking at directly into the bloodstream, it is highly lethal. And animals can react differently than humans. Now, is that always the case? No. Usually mice react very similar to humans, and even if mice don't, we can then upgrade to like chickens and like apes if we really, really want to be certain. Now, are there poisons in our food? Yes. But are they safe? The answer may not be as clear cut. Now, sometimes it's best to discuss hazards as a category. As we see, this is a hot mess of a slide because I have so many different chemicals on here, and I just felt I needed to show that we could classify things as pesticides, food additives, industrial toxins, environmental pollutants, household hazards, etc. But however, some of these guys will fit into multiple different categories. Ethyl acetate is a solvent both for consumers and industry, but it's also sometimes a food additive, as adding to food flavoring, because it's an ester. Esters often have interesting flavors associated with them. Chlorine gas is a disinfectant. It's often in bleach, and it's also used industrially as a chemical to produce plastics and pharmaceuticals. Yet it's also a neurotoxic gas that was used in World War I. Nicotine is a highly addictive toxin in tobacco. It's also a natural insecticide. When we look at toxins, the most powerful toxins are of biological origin rather than being man-made. So the poisons that man can make are nothing compared to the poisons nature can make. one of the most powerful toxins is botulinum toxin A, which is pictured at the very bottom left. It's a very complex protein, which you see all those swirlies. Those are various alpha helices and beta sheets and whatnot. So it's not a small enough molecule that we can actually show it what the chemical structure is. But botulinum toxin is created by the bacterium, by a bacteria in the soil, and that thrives on spoiled food. Where that's going to come into effect is when you have improperly canned fruits and vegetables. So you grow your own garden, you don't quite sterilize the food, and then you can them for a long period of time, and then you get botulism. Essentially, the bacteria grows, it thrives in the low oxygen environment. It produces that toxin, and then you eat the food and you die. It doesn't take much. It's 3 milligrams, 3 times 10 to the negative 8th milligrams per kilogram. So that would be what, like, so 0.03 nanograms per kilogram of body weight. So it doesn't take much. Doesn't take much. This can also happen in poorly preserved meats. Now, while the microbe will be killed, the bacteria gets killed on digestion, the toxin would remain. The protein remains and it gets into your bloodstream and kills you. Now, the microbe and the toxin can be destroyed at high enough temperature. So when you cook the food properly, or I think you have to boil the fruits and vegetables before canning, you're essentially destroying any of that microbe and any toxin that exists before you can them. And also another thing, the bacteria cannot survive in highly acidic food. So food below the pH of 4.6. So like pineapple will be always safe because it's highly acidic in nature. But things like, apples, peaches may not be the case. Now, botulism, and botulinum comes Latin of sausage, botulus, which referred to a famous case of botulism in the 19th century in Germany with more than 200 cases of the illness, which was traced back to improperly prepared sausages. So that's kind of awful in the way that my sausage is so bad it becomes famous for a horrible chemical. So the sausage industry never recovers. And nowadays, it's probably more common in canned foods from people who want to save their food for later. Now, tetanus is the next most toxic one. Tetanus, another complicated protein. I think the top one right next to it is also that when you get the illness tetanus from this toxin, it's known as lockjaw. Your muscles start to seize up and your limbs start to seize up, and eventually it causes your diaphragm to seize up and you can't breathe. But that's also a microbe that's in the soil. It's found in the soil, saliva, dust, and manure. Typically, we associate tetanus with rusty nails, like you step on a nail, but really the nail is just the method of transferring the bacteria that already was there in the soil into the body, because it needs cuts or punctures in the body. So if it's on an animal's teeth and saliva and the animal bites you, you have it cut, saliva gets in, you get the bacteria in. So, but the nail is just a way to transfer the dirt and bacteria that was already there. The next guy, I think below it, is diphtheria. Diphtheria toxin is a direct contact through the air or contaminated objects. Just an illness, doesn't necessarily kill you, but it's pretty toxic. But notice, diphtheria jumps from 3 times to 3 times 10 to the negative 4th. So that's essentially 0.3 micrograms instead of 0.03 nanograms. Now, the fourth most toxic, at least on this list, is a man-made It's 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzo P dioxin, or TCDD, as you see in the top left. Now, this is a byproduct of the industrial production of Agent Orange. As the book puts it, oh yeah, just a casual herbicide we used in Vietnam. No, this is a large-scale defoliant we used during the Vietnam War to try to smoke out our enemies. When they're hiding in the jungle, we want to destroy as many herbs or plants as possible. Unfortunately, Agent Orange had this toxin mixed in because that's how we made Agent Orange. The effects from exposure included birth defects and the promotion of cancer from other compounds, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't cause cancer directly, but it caused your body to turn other compounds into carcinogens, which still caused cancer. We have various deadly nerve gases like sarin. Sarin's way over here, but sarin, which is a phosphofluorine gas. We have like things like soman and tabodin. Now, this list here is far from comprehensive. They're missing things like the nerve gas VX gas, which I included here. Similar structure, you have that the phosphorus group, but it has a sulfur and oxygen off that instead of the fluorine, and it has this nitrogen group. VX gas was probably one of the, well, at least one of my best knowledge of this is from the 1996 The Rock with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. But it's also been recently used to kill, I think it was Kim Jong-un's uncle. So it is a very much so real gas. It's not just a Hollywood effect. Sarin has 172 micrograms per kilogram intravenous dosage to be poisoned, but it has a 28 to 35 milligram dosage to breathe it in per minute. Now, VX, instead of 172, has somewhere between 70 and 140 micrograms per kilogram just of skin exposure. So it can sink into the skin. You don't have to inject it in your blood. So it's still far more lethal. But to breathe it in, instead of a 28 to 35 milligrams, it's 15 milligrams per meter cubed per minute of breathing that in for several minutes to kill you. So far more lethal. So this list is not the most lethal, not by far. Now, some on this list we've already discussed, like parathion, which is an insecticide, isoflurate, which is actually used to treat glaucoma, but it can also be a nerve agent because it affects the nerves, but they use it to selectively affect the nerves of the eyes. Now, sodium cyanide, I'm not even going to bother to show that one, but has a variety of uses. We use it to extract gold from ore. We use it to electroplate other metals. We use it in fumigation and pest control. That's probably the best known. But so imagine you're a miner, you're using this highly toxic substance to help you get the gold out of these ores, and you don't give a crap where it ends up. So all those towns that left around the mines, suddenly they have toxin. Fun. Now, some other poisons include things like muscarine from mushrooms. Let's see, I have muscarine shown right there, which is a ring structure. We have this ammonia group. So the poisonous mushrooms. We have I didn't show bufotoxin, which is the venom of the common toad, but I do have things like strychnine, which is the poison. It comes from a plant. It's a very highly complicated interlocked ring structure. So some of them are very complicated. Some of them are very, very simple to be a poison. Strychnine, most commonly used as a rat poison, but it comes from the seeds of certain trees tubocuarine, which is a plant extract used in South America for various paralyzing poisonous arrows. What they left out is the brachiotoxins, which is down here, which is the poison from poison dart frog, also a paralytic agent. Kind of similar, kind of different. I think the poison dart frog works from like 1 microgram per kilogram to 5 milligrams per kilogram, depending on that. And the last two, solanine, solanine and aflatoxin, were there and there. Those guys are actually ones that are big problems in our food supply. Aflatoxin comes from a toxin produced by a mold that can be found in various corn and grains. So like when we store those for a long period of time, like if mold develops, it can produce the toxin that spoils that and makes people very sick. And solanine is a derivative of nightshade that's found in green potatoes and tomatoes. And you can see the green potato-ness kind of right here if you have the book. When the potato starts not fully developed, it can be poison. It can be a poison. Well, it may not kill you. It still can make you really sick. Also, even if you survive the aflatoxin, it's also a potent liver carcinogen. So even if you survive it, you may get cancer later on. So some of these toxins are fatal 2 ways. Now, while all these horrendous toxins have a variety of effects and lethalities, the relative lethality can be measured and compared. So while salt is still lethal, it takes far more of that to kill us than just botulinum toxin, which takes barely any at all. So now that we recognize that there are poisons in the food, we can return to the question, but is our food safe? Is it? Now, a reasonable question needs a reasonable definition of what is safe. Is safe going to be free from all danger? Well, obviously, no. If that were true, nothing is safe, we can't eat. The harm possible depends on 5 things. 1, the chemical characteristics. So what is its chemical formula? What does it do? 2, the quantity used. So how much is the dosage? How it's used. Is it inhaled? Is it injected? What's going on here? The question 4 is, then how effective is it on the human race as a whole? So how effective with essential general lethal dosage on humans? And then 5, how effective it is on you as an individual? Because honestly, humans as a whole, most of us can digest lactose and lactic acid just fine. There are some of us that cannot. So that's the difference between human race and individual. Some of us can process sugar. Some of us have diabetes and have trouble doing that. So depends on human race versus individual. So safety has to be defined as the acceptability of risk. This was defined by chemist William Lawrence. Life in itself is filled with danger. It's all about what dangers will we risk. In itself, it's impossible to prove anything to be hazard-free. Just like it's impossible to prove any scientific fact, all you can just prove is that I haven't disproven it yet. I can't prove this is safe. I just know I haven't found any dangers yet. A test can be run 10,000 different ways and still find 0 hazards. And yet when you run it again, the 10,001st way, suddenly danger appears. So we run this on mice. Suddenly we find out later, oh yeah, it doesn't affect mice, but affects this animal. Or, oh, you don't need to eat it, you have to spill it on your skin. Or you have to accidentally inject it into your blood, or you have to get it in your eye, or something like that. So whether it's a perfect storm of events or a new method of detection, there's that finds this trace effect. This can change. The perfect example is a drug that was developed in the 1950s and 60s. The way the book reads it, thalidomide was a sleeping pill or anti-anxiety pill, but really it was more commonly used for morning sickness and nausea. So pregnant women would be actively want to take it, not just, oh, I have trouble sleeping, I'm going to take this. It's no, like I'm vomiting every morning, I want to take this. So several routine tests showed its non-toxicity. While it wasn't approved in the US because they still had some doubts, they haven't done all the tests, it was approved and released in Europe. And the book discusses some 4,000 babies in Germany, some 1,000 babies in the UK, and 20 in the USA, which came from tourists going to Europe and then getting it. But I think looking up, the final total may be close to 10,000 babies rather than the 5,000 they discuss in the book, born with severe birth defects. If you want to look up that, take it with your own risk. I'm not showing them on these slides, but they have shortened or completely absent limbs. These babies were called flipper babies. It's horrible, but it's the truth. It caused these horrendous birth defects and oftentimes killing the kid, but there's many of survivors. This problem, this defect, was eventually linked to thalidomide, taken within the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. It's an example of a teratogen, which comes from Greek teratos, monster or marvel, and genus, born or produced by or begetter of. Remember our oxygen, oxygenos, begetter of acid, begetter of sharp. So teratogen, teratos, begetter of monsters. It's a substance that produces severe birth defects. They found no hazard to rats, to dogs, to cats, to chickens. No problem. They were safe. But if you test it on rabbits, test it on monkeys, you see that the danger. So it didn't work. There's no negative effect on all these animals, but yet rabbits, monkeys, and humans, horribly problematic. Now, it's actually been postulated that a chiral enantiomer of this, that this little atom right here could be different, could go one way versus the other, and you create a mirror image of the structure. The chiral structure is when you have a mirror image. Actually, that's called a enantiomer. But a chiral molecule is a molecule where you could have a structure going up versus down, and a different way of arranging it. And it's essentially the same molecule, the same formula put together in the same way, but it's different in space. And that enantiomer causes the birth defects. But the one problem is the body can naturally convert one enantiomer to the other, at least in this case. The handedness of this molecule, one hand is safe, the other hand is horribly toxic that the body can't use because enzymes can only work certain ways. If this is the mirror image, it won't fit in as nice, and that's where the problem starts. So maybe the case was they made the right enantiomer and used it, and rats, dogs, cats, and chickens can't produce the other, can't convert it, but rabbits and monkeys could. Maybe that's why. Still not fully understood. That being said, it's still very low toxicity in non-pregnant women. Low toxicity overall. So it's still in use. It's used to treat ulcers, arthritis, leprosy, tuberculosis, some instances of AIDS, in people with skin graft rejection, and I think certain forms of skin cancer. I think myeloma, something like that. Darker, more ironic way to look at the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're still using it. Just don't be pregnant while you're using it. Now that safety is understood as a accepted risk, what risk should be determined by society rather than the person to person? Now, aspirin use is determined by person. I can take aspirin if I want to, or I can say it's my religious belief that I should not take aspirin, or it's my belief my body is a temple, I should not take aspirin. But heroin uses, for example, is determined by society. No amount of heroin is allowed in America, at least right now. You're not allowed to have heroin. You'll be arrested. Well, in 1970, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, society limited the free access of aspirin. They tried to make it harder by putting the childproof caps on there and try to limit the amount of aspirin pills in a bottle. So they tried to limit access to its youngest members of society. So just like we have age restrictions on cigarettes and liquor, we don't allow young people to smoke. At least we try to prevent that, and we don't allow people under 21 to drink liquor. That was the drinking age was originally lower, and we've raised it up. Now, whether you agree with that or disagree with that, society is limiting that hazard. We have various different regulation organizations that do that. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, regulates what can be put into our food. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, regulates what chemicals can be released into our environment. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Hazard Association, regulates what hazards we're allowed to take at work. Thank God, as much as you're like, oh, government oversight. Well, it's thanks to government oversight like them that prevents you from losing your fingers at work, because they're like, you're not allowed to let little kids be like using their bare hands to unclog this machinery. You're not losing workers by the dozen because of that. And if so, they're highly punished. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms regulates alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And the U.S. Public Health Safety investigates illnesses and from food spoilage and outbreaks. So if you remember, like, oh, E. coli is going around, they're like, oh, where's that from? Oh, it's from these cabbages or this lettuce over in this California farm or whatever. And they try to link that out and get the food recalled. All these groups are trying to keep us all safe. Well, we're going to focus mainly on the FDA. The FDA limits largely what additives can be added to food through careful examination of both the LD50 and 2 or more species. So we need at least 2 species to check. And we also check for its maximum no effect limit. So how much can we take before we start to see any effect, not just dead? How much before we start to get sick at all? And they also try to study its long-term hazards. While the LD50 is the acute and immediate result hazard, we must also judge whether it be beneficial well below this threshold, because we don't want to get anywhere close to the LD50, but is this beneficial even at low doses? So they'll do various feeding tests to determine these limits and produce what was considered the no observable effect. And they usually limit this to milligrams per kilogram. The FDA actually permits no more than 1/100th, or essentially 1% of the no effect level in food based on the average daily consumption. So even if you go crazy and eat way too many tacos, the taco seasoning isn't going to like overload you, because like unless you eat 100 tacos in the daily and they're right at the limit, you should be fine. And that comes with the term acceptable daily intake, or ADI, which is the 1% of the maximum daily amount. As data changes, those limits may be lowered. If they suddenly find a new effect, they'll change things around. Long-term tests are then performed to study the chronic effects. We need to figure out, will this have effect on fertility? Or will this cause birth defects? Or will it be mutagenic effects like carcinogens that will cause cancer? Now, I want to do a quick aside to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to cancer. What causes cancer? Now, it's not so quick and easy, because Not all mutations necessarily cause cancer. Mutations are usually changes in the genome, changes that where you produce, sometimes it just produces a bad protein or something that doesn't work. Usually the cell either dies or they fix it. But for cancer, you need two types of standard mutations to occur. A removal of a reproduction limiter and removal of the self-check, self-regulation. So cells will naturally undergo cell division through what's called mitosis. But this will happen as an on-needed basis. You need more cells, it will split apart. They'll go like so many a day. So many cells will be split apart in a day. As more cells die, they'll split apart to replace them. Now, in cancer cells, you remove that limiter. So rather than it divides every 6 hours, maybe it divides every hour. So it keeps dividing and dividing and dividing. Cancer is essentially uncontrolled cell growth. Well, thankfully, most cells have a self-regulating process that initiates what's called cell death if there's a problem in the cell. If you cannot properly reproduce or it starts doing something it shouldn't, the cell decides to commit suicide for the sake of the body, a process called apoptosis, where it kills itself. Now, when we have the uncontrolled growth, as long as the apoptosis can initiate, we kill those bad cells, cancer stopped. But when you no longer have that regulator, it can grow and it won't take commands to kill itself. So it's going to just keep growing and growing and growing. So that's what really brings about cancer. Now, the problem with cancer in itself is that there is no, there are known ways that these can happen, but there's no just one way. There's various different ways this can occur. Some things like HPV, we know can create cervical cancer and other types of cancer. We know that smoking can cause lung cancer, that chewing tobacco can cause like mouth and gum and throat cancer, that these things can cause cancer, but we don't always know why. Sometimes it's carcinogens in them. Sometimes it's like we know that sunlight can cause skin cancer because these UV lights damage our skin's DNA. But there's so many different ways that it's hard to prevent all of them. We just know we get better at recognizing how to prevent them by leaving out carcinogens and how to cure them. So that's cancer. Because we're going to talk about cancer a little bit more and carcinogens. But the FDA does all these things and tries to protect us from the unfettered capitalism that some people claim they want. Not to get political, but there is a meme out there. I've shown you the meme. How much sawdust can I put in a Rice Krispie treat before people notice? Now, while this is a fake science fair project, it is not too wrong from how things used to go. Companies used to put whatever cheap fillers they could into food to make the food look better, to make them look nicer, shinier. It's like trying to make the food look like the food you see in the advertisements. They put whatever filler or whatnot they could get away with, and sometimes they didn't get away with it. People got sick. People got ill because they're taking these chemicals. We didn't know how dangerous the chemicals were. We just pumped it in there because, hey, I want the food to look great and go far and be dirt cheap, and we didn't worry about that. So things like borax, sulfuric acid, saltpeter, formaldehyde, copper sulfate. Copper sulfate made the peas look super green, and so they look really fresh. Benzoic acid. In 1901, government chemist Harvey Wiley, on the bottom left, started to fight back against the food industry with human trials. He paid like a bunch of young men to eat these food additives, and then he'd give them all they can eat and paid them like $5 a week, and they got like health checks and like after every meal, but they could only eat the food we have. And so he did some of the first human tests on some of these additives. His group was nicknamed the Poison Squad, and they were responsible for passing the Pure and Food Drug Act and the eventual formation of the FDA in 1906. The Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, also came out in 1906, vilifying the meat industry, being that how the meat industry, like, oh, dead carcass, drop something into the offal, and you drop meat on offal. Well, put it back on the chain. It's like, oh, there's rats in there. There's, oh, someone falls into the meat. Oh, well, you just get a little bit extra protein. So we saw the horrors of the industrial food that we had to clean up. So Dr. Wiley's exploits are actually captured in the PBS documentary for the American Experience called The Poison Squad. Very good movie. It's a 2-hour documentary. If you like PBS documentaries, it's a good one. It's worth watching. Just don't watch it on an empty stomach. With some of these chemical hazards, lawmakers will delegate the finer details to the agency officials at the FDA. But federal law has set a zero tolerance level on carcinogens, except for one notable exception that we'll talk about in a minute. They judge no acceptable level of risk is worth it to have a known carcinogen. In 1958, James Delaney, over here, of New York, introduced the amendment into the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act that essentially no additive is deemed safe if it induces cancer in any man or animal in any way, shape, or form. This was called the Delaney Amendment. No additive can cause cancer at any level. Carcinogen has an ADI, acceptable daily intake, of 0. While some toxins are allowed, carcinogens are not. Some toxins, we know you can take a little bit in. It's safe. We know it's poisonous, but we know it's not poisonous at that level. No carcinogen is safe. Now, this was an effective bar on known carcinogens, despite any prospective benefits they might have. However, the one exception sweetens the hypocrisy of it all. That one is saccharin. Saccharin was discovered in 1879 by Ira Remain on the left, who worked at Johns Hopkins, and a student, Konstantin Fahlberg, who actually did the real discovering. So Fahlberg, after cleaning up in the lab, went to go get dinner, and he was eating some bread, and he noticed the bread was incredibly sweet. Now, he then traced the sweetness to his hands and arms. So he's like, taste his hands. So it's not the bread that's sweet, it's the things touching the bread sweet. And then he figured out it must be some residue he got on his hands and arms in the lab. So obviously he didn't do a great job cleaning up. He then did the incredibly dangerous thing of taste testing his chemicals to try to narrow down and isolate that sweetness. He and Remen would then immediately go on to publish a paper on the new compound saccharin that they've discovered. Now, saccharin over there is derived from the Latin and Greek for sugar. Saccharin, among other things, provides no energy or chemical components that the body tissue can use. So it has no nutritional value. It goes in, we taste sweetness, we pee it out, no problem. Our body can't burn it for fuel, so we don't get fatter. It cannot break it down in any way, really, so we cannot be used. So we don't get fatter. It's 500 times more sweeter than table sugar. So one teaspoon of saccharin in 145,000 liters, which is enough water to cover a football field 1.25 inch deep, is still sweet to the taste. You can still taste the saccharin in there. It immediately went into food production. We immediately go, holy crap, let's put this in food. And it became incredibly popular in 1907 among diabetics. And by 1958, saccharin joined the list of what was called GRAS additives, generally recognized as safe additives. Now, in the 1960s, the popularity further increased with the advent of diet drinks. So, like, oh, I want this Diet Coke. I don't want all the calories of all the sugar in there, so we put the saccharin in instead. But in 1972, the FDA removed it from the generally recognized as safe list and began testing after there began to be some doubts on its safety. Now, the lab tests would then prove it to be incredibly weak carcinogen, but it did cause bladder cancer in mice. Now, despite the triviality of the danger, since it was a very weak carcinogen, the Delaney Amendment said it cannot be. We will not use it. It cannot be. So in 1977, the FDA announced they had plans on banning saccharin. Unfortunately, the public was already used to it. They were happy with it. They said, no, the public outcry was so great that Congress has made this one exception, that the only zero, and because it was the only 0-calorie sweetener at the time, it hung around. Doctors were able to argue that be able to prevent obesity was far greater in health savings than worth the risk of the bladder cancer. So eventually the Congress passed the Saccharin Study and Labeling Act in 1977 that basically prevented the FDA from banning it, but required a warning label that, oh yeah, this is a weak carcinogen. Just kind of like we slap on cigarettes. Oh, by the way, this is carcinogenic. Well, don't take it, I guess. But seeing as you already bought it, oh well. Now, today, saccharin is just one of many artificial sweeteners, so the need for using saccharin, not quite as important. Aspartame, for example, over here, a little bit longer chain, no sulfur groups. It's not 0-calorie, but it's only 4 calories per gram. And it's 160 times sweeter than table sugar. Sucralose over here, we have a dual ring effect with some chlorines on it, is close to 320 to 1,000 times sweeter than sugar. Monk fruit extract, which is has some various components, and this is not the only one, but this massive thing, mongroside V, is probably the most common one, is 250 times sweeter. Look at how many rings are in there. It's a very complicated molecule. And stevia, which produces various steviols and glycosidic steviols, like this one, stevioside, is somewhere between 30 to 150 times sweeter and still 0 calories. So we got a lot of interlinked rings in both of these structures. So there's a lot of other options of 0-calorie sweeteners, some of them more dangerous than others. So we're trying, like, I think stevia and maybe monk fruit extract are some of the safer ones currently, but that's not to say they're perfectly safe. Now, with all the smack we talk about food additives, obviously natural unprocessed food must be free of chemicals and other hazards, right? Well, once again, we're wrong. The main difference between processed and unprocessed food is just that the processed food have to list all the ingredients. We have to list what's all in them. Foods are often highly complex mixtures of a variety of various chemical classes. They have aldehydes, ketones, alcohols, esters, and acids, and a variety of hydrocarbons in there that you can't really break down. It's so complex, we don't always know them all. I mean, yes, you could probably build a lot of these together, take some lab chemicals and mix it in, but is it necessarily as good as natural? It's hard to say. But the fact that there are so many complexities in there that we can't really get. Oil of oranges has at least 40 compounds in it. A potato has close to 150 different compounds. Mangoes contain numerous different chemicals, carbohydrates, proteins, flavonoids, fatty acids, minerals, vitamins, and yet, is it safe? Sure. I mean, a lot of people eat mangoes. They're not going to stop. There are plenty of natural pesticides that we may take in but for every 1 gram of synthetic residue that we eat 10 kilograms of natural pesticides. I mean, some natural plant products are carcinogenic in addition to being a toxin. Here's are just a list of a few of them. Safrole over here, a key component in sassafras, is known to cause liver cancer in mice. Mustard oil, which is our allyl isocyanate down here, causes tumors. We have estradiol, oil of tarragon, or tarragon, basil, and fennel, which kind of looks like it's saying, what, me worry about cancer? It causes tumors. We have benzopyrene, which is present in smoked meats. I mean, obviously, we're not going to stop smoking our meat. It's like, that's good stuff. I mean, grilling things out doesn't exactly do good things for it. Dimethyl nitrosamine, cooked bacon. I'm not stopping eating bacon. I don't know about you. It's good. So, I mean, it causes cancer. Tannic acid and tannins, this huge, massively complex molecule present in our teas, our coffee, or cocoa. I'm not stopping drinking coffee. I'm drinking like 2 or 3 cups a day. That's also present in whiskey. I'm not going to stop drinking that. Yet we don't actively try to avoid these foods. The key in all things is in moderation. Moderation. Don't drink too much coffee. Don't drink too much whiskey. Don't eat too much bacon. I mean, although myristicin in nutmeg is eaten, if it's eaten in a very large enough single dose, it can cause liver damage and hallucinations. However, even the most heavily spiced meals only run 2% of the necessary amount. So the likelihood of you eating enough nutmeg to give yourself hallucinations, not very likely. Caffeine has LD50 of 130 milligrams per kilogram, but that's a lot. To do that by coffee alone, you'd have to drink something like 70 cups in a day. The liver actually serves as a shield against many poisons. As long as it isn't overwhelmed by a single massive dose of any one toxin, it can usually metabolize them into something safe. It's actually better to treat small doses of mini toxin than a large dose of less toxin. So like the liver can treat several different types of toxin at the same time, but it can only treat so much of one toxin at a time. So it's a slower process for a large dose of one than it is for many. So the idea is a varied diet will actually keep you safer. Last one, just looking, tetrodotoxin, which is our pufferfish, our fugu, which causes paralysis. Just showing you some neat molecules out there that these molecules cause cancer. Yet some of these look very similar to the same molecules we used in sugar. What makes one safe and the other dangerous? It's so hard to say. We can't really determine, which is why we do our tests. Now, the book actually talks about the Ames test, that rather than murder a bunch of mice every time we want to test a new chemical, they found a way to, well, essentially test on bacteria. That they modify bacteria with a certain lack of a certain key amino acid, and an inability to produce it by itself, so the bacteria won't grow by itself. But the bacteria is very sensitive to carcinogens. If it bumps into a carcinogen, it will usually cause some sort of mutation that allows it to change back to how it normally was, and so it starts producing the histidine that it needs and grows like rapid. So if the bacteria grows, it bumped into a carcinogen. And so that's a way they can test it without having to murder a bunch of mice. But that is our chapter. That is our chapter. Even with our health conscious society today, poisonings are still rather common. I mean, just look at the example of late December 2023. There was a bunch of spinach and other vegetables, especially found in Australia, and that were causing people to get sick and a few to die. They were experiencing heart palpitations and hallucinations. They found the source of this has to do with essentially a weed that got mixed in, a weed that has the toxic compound solanine, coming from the same family as nightshade, Jimson weed, and mandrake root. That essentially the toxic compound that we've been talking about this chapter got mixed in with the salad, and so people would eat this and potentially get sick. And ever so truthfully, the danger is in the dosage. That if you look at the LD50, some people just got mildly sick. Some people experienced powerful hallucinations. Some people died because of this. And yet, not everyone who took this died. Some people probably didn't eat as much salad. Some people had a different body weight. Some people had a higher tolerance. And it's never more clear than in this case that sometimes these things still happen. Botulism may not be as common as it once was, but people still get sick. People still accidentally ingest poisons. And so this is this chapter is still very relevant today. So just something to think about. Something more topical, something more recent to think about. Okay. See you next video.